Hello everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Just wanted to start with asking that if you do have questions throughout the webinar, if you use the Q&A facility, which you'll either see at the top of your screen or the bottom of your screen, depending on how it's laid out, we will be picking up those questions and running through them at the panel session at the end of the webinar. If you do have any things you want to chat about, share with others, then there is a chat facility and you can put any links within that. There are surveys throughout this webinar today, so if you wouldn't mind completing them, they would be really useful. And last thing is to say that this is being recorded and we will be sharing it post-event. So if you no need to take any notes, we will be sharing a whole recording of the webinar. Over to you, Tim.
Great stuff. Ian, thank you very much. Folks, thanks very much for joining us today. We originally set this up as an introduction for the installers, maintainers, and channel partners in the telecare and text-enabled services sector. But we've been joined today by quite a lot of housing providers and local authorities. So the more the merrier, of course, and we'll try and make the content, which I think is equally applicable in both instances, but we'll try and make it relevant, recognizing that there is a slightly more mixed audience than we'd originally anticipated. I believe that we've had such a strong sign up for this is because there has been so much more momentum during the course of this year, so much more understanding about the digital transition that's taking place in technology-enabled care services and how timely and essential it is to really understand what is taking place, when it's taking place, and what that means for your respective businesses. As a key part of that, we're going to hear today from John Livermore from Openreach, who will explain a great deal about the timescales and the implications. And I think if you haven't heard John speak before, you'll really appreciate the frankness and the simplicity he brings to what could be an otherwise very, very confusing and unnerving subject. So I'm sure you'll get a lot out of that place. Carl, our CTO, is going to describe some of the implications that we're seeing in terms of those network transformations that John will describe from both an Openreach and a communication provider. Carl will describe how those are playing out in terms of the experiences that we're already seeing in the monitoring center. And then we'll have a panel discussion, which will involve representatives from a number of different organizations who have installation and maintenance experience, deep experience across the UK markets. And this will be a fantastic opportunity for you to raise thoughts, comments, questions that you'd like a considered and informed view on. From my point of view, I'm just going to open with a few thoughts and comments about the implications and the opportunities that the transition from analog telecare services to digital telecare services represents. Doesn't matter whether you're a housing provider, a local authority, or whether you're an installer or a maintainer, everybody has some skin in this game. And the messaging from the TSA, from the Department of Health and Social Care, from the Scottish Digital Office is all really strident, very, very strong about the risk that can be created, the safety, the well-being, the health risk that can be created to some of the most vulnerable people in our society by not taking urgent action around this analog to digital transition. But before we focus overly just on the risks that there is represented if the move isn't made, it's also really important to focus on the opportunities that are created as transitions take place from an analog to a digital technology-enabled care services environment. And we feel we can speak with real authority in this area. Appello have helped more housing providers move to a fully digital technology care services environment than anybody else in the UK. Nobody No other provider, manufacturer, supplier has moved as many end residents to a fully digital, end-to-end digital telecare environment as Appello have. No other provider has taken as many fully digital telecare calls as Appello have. We have handled literally millions of digital telecare calls, more than all the other monitoring centres in the country put together. And as a result of that, we think we've got a real authenticity about what we're able to say about the benefits of telecare when it's in a digital environment, not just the need to move there from a health and safety benefit. What's quite encouraging is that from survey research, which the TSA did, it seems like a lot of housing and care providers already believe they have plans in place that are on or ahead of schedule. Now, that's a really interesting statistic when you compare it with some of the other data points that suggest that out of the circa 1 million dispersed alarms, only 6% roughly have been upgraded to digital, and only roughly 5% of all hardwired schemes have been upgraded to fully digital. So if those plans are in place and on track, that suggests the next few years are going to be absolutely tumultuous for the sector. And it's highly unlikely that there is that amount of equipment, that amount of availability of resources to install it, maintain it, provide it, even give guidance on it. So there's a square that doesn't necessarily, or a circle that doesn't necessarily get squared. But nonetheless, the important thing is there is an opportunity for everybody involved in this sector. If you are an installer or a maintainer and you don't already have a great number of your customers on a committed pathway to digital transition, then this is a moment for you to step forward and lean in. We have some suggestions about how to make the most of that, and I'll come to those in a second or two. We also, and again, just recognizing that we would, although this was originally intended as a installers and maintainers session, we've been joined by a lot of housing providers and local authorities. As a reminder, the reason it's such a benefit and an opportunity in that space is because analog to digital transition shouldn't just be about replacing one box with another one that does exactly the same. Digital services have the opportunity to be so much more intelligent, to provide a much richer living experience. And there are some really obvious examples of that, and I'll draw some of those out in a moment or two. What I think is key is that we don't just think about this as being a like-for-like transition. We think about this as being an opportunity to do things better, because that's what digital telecare enables. It enables more remote diagnostics, enabling better first-time fixes. It enables service providers, installers, maintainers to be more efficient about how they deliver service and what they're able to demonstrate in terms of their capabilities to really understand what's happening on a customer's site, do remote diagnostics, be able to partner with a provider like Appello, who have a capability to do remote fixes, and as a result of that, improve the customer experience significantly, because there is much more plug and play, there is much more remote insight into uptime, downtime, there is more proactive understanding of whether a system is working or not working. And there are a whole raft of opportunities about having a better, richer living experience, because we are able to see and understand more about how a resident is currently fulfilling their life, the degree to which they're following their normal living patterns, the degree to which their property is a healthy temperature or versus an unhealthy temperature. All of those are benefits and capabilities which digital telecare services unlock. Well, certainly those from Appello and a few others do. and really enable a transition from a traditional reactive telecare world to something a lot more involving. And to give that some color and to bring that to life a little bit, we've deployed Smart Living Solutions, which is our communal group living emergency call system, in about 40,000 apartments now, roughly speaking, apartments and homes. The feedback has been just excellent on the degree to which this has transformed people's lives, improved the quality and the experience they have of living in the apartment. Video door entry, giving them confidence to let people in through the front door that perhaps they would have felt uncertain about, giving them reassurance that they are letting in the right person. The video apartment to apartment calling, helping reduce social isolation and improve inclusion, and just the sleeker look and feel of all of our devices compared to standard telecare devices, reducing that stigmatization, improving that sense of I am a valuable person. I'm not somebody old who has to put up with old crappy beige boxes on the wall. I get something that looks like it was designed for a modern living experience and has the features and the functionality to enrich my living routines as a result of that. We've made a tremendous, as I said, tremendous difference to literally tens and thousands of residents. That's why we can speak with confidence about having more capability in analog to digital transition than any other provider. We've got a range of solutions across hardwired and dispersed, across different price points, different capabilities, with fantastic interoperability in terms of the dispersed alarm with some of the major peripheral manufacturers such as Care and Tunstall, meaning that existing peripherals don't need to be replaced. They can be reused, keeping the costs down, also reducing the amount of global electronic waste, and importantly, meaning that end users don't have to get familiar with another set of peripheral devices. So a whole range of really compelling reasons why Appello can help you as a service provider or a maintainer, or as a housing provider, or as a local authority, deliver a better experience to your customers, and one that helps them take them on the journey from analog to digital in a really life improving, margin improving, and credibility improving manner. Ian, if you could move on. We're going to come to this slot in a second or two, but first of all, we wanted to let John Livermore from Openreach give a perspective on, as I mentioned earlier, the timescales and the what happens next in terms of the analog to digital transition. So, John, over to you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Openview. God, it took me back a few years there, Tim.
Yeah, no,
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Livermore, working at Openreach. Very grateful to Appello, to Tim and these folks here today, and to you for giving me this time. So about 10-minute presentation, maybe a little bit longer than that, maybe 15, but we'll be on the panel later. If you can hold your questions until then, that would be great. Apologies those that have heard this before. A little bit of positioning, just in terms of where we sit. Very often people talk about BT Openreach and BT Openreach. That's not the case. Hasn't been some years, in fact. Just to explain where we sit, Openreach now, effectively Openreach Limited, we sit as an engineering company, and we sit between the telephone exchange building and the customer's premises, and our bit ends effectively at the customer's master socket. And then we sell to some 690 communications providers, so people that you'll know, household name Sky, Talk, BT, Vodafone, Zen. Vodafone's an interesting one because, of course, Vodafone people think of as SIM cards, but actually they're in the top 6 suppliers of landlines in the UK. But there are 690 of these folks. I can probably throw a few names like Gamma and Colt and Daisy, and the list just goes on and on. You will know lots of these. They will be people potentially that you buy your telephony services from. We know them as communications providers. You may know them as ISPs or service providers or the phone company or whatever it might be. And these are our customers. And then you and I at home in business, in the telecare world, in terms of clients out there, those CPs, those communication providers, will be their suppliers of telephony, broadband, etc. In terms of then the question, I guess, is why am I here? Because actually none of you are my customers. My customers are these communications providers. So because this particular program, known to us as the All IP program, you will know it as PSTN switch off maybe, or you've heard it as Analogue to Digital. Ultimately, there is no national campaign. The reason for that is because a lot of people say to me, isn't this like the TV switchover we had a few years ago? In some ways it is, but in other ways it absolutely isn't. The TV campaign was geographic. So a whole area was told, you know, on this day your TV be switched over and so forth. This is much more complex. And it is being done by every provider at their own speed. So if anyone ever says to you, when's my exchange going over to this thing? That's not the question to ask. As far as we're concerned, the exchange is there, it's working. There is stuff in there that actually can be migrated onto. It isn't a matter about waiting for a certain date. So what are you waiting for? You're waiting for your provider. So that's not us kicking the can down the road. It's not us saying it's nothing to do with us. We work collaboratively with our customers, but ultimately we don't have the gift to say when you or your client is going to be switched over from analog to digital. That is done by their provider. Let's take you through a few slides and just present those things to you, because I think it'll give you a bit more color on what it is that I'm talking about. So let me just, I think I can't present at the moment, Holly, because it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So if you've got my slides, please put them up. If not, if you can give me access, that will be good. Because I'm still getting host disabled participant at the moment. Let's just give that another.
No worries. We'll sort that out.
Right, I'll tell you what. Well, you saw that and I'll carry on going. So a little bit of an illustration for you. Oh, this looks exciting. Hold on, what's happening? Oh, there we are. So if you wouldn't mind, is that you, Ian? Have you got that? There we go. So if you can go to this next slide, please. I feel very Chris Whitterish now. So next slide,
there you
please.
go, John. Sorry about that.
Thank you. That's right. So let's talk a little bit about this. So again, apologies for this. I'm not a technical person. I'm not an engineer. That's why I've got this job, because hopefully I can explain to you in the same way as I'd explain to you if you were sitting with me over a cup of coffee. This isn't going to be too hope you arduous. I'm going to talk about boxes rather than massive amounts of equipment and stuff. You're not interested. What you want to know is, why should you listen? Why do you care? It is not an understatement, I really don't think, to say this is the biggest thing to happen to the telephony industry in the UK, probably for a generation. And I say that advisedly, with everyone talking about COVID, unprecedented. This is a big change for us. So what am I showing you on this screen? If you look to the three boxes on the left-hand side here, these are basically, if you look to the left-hand side, it's just the telephone exchange. So you will know, you may not know, but certainly most of us have seen pretty ugly buildings around. Usually look very 60s, very squat. You might actually have a nice, pretty one, but generally telephone exchanges are not the prettiest buildings in the world. And inside there's a whole range of equipment that's been there for a long, long time. The last time anything significant was really done was in the 1980s. And in the 1980s, this black box that you can see on your left-hand side came along. And that black box represents equipment installed in the 1980s by BT Group, and that was called System X or System Y. It took us from analog to digital, which seems strange we're talking about analog to digital again, but you'll see why later in the presentation. Ultimately, it took us from mechanical and it took us from electronic through to a digital exchange. It meant that we started to sell ones and zeros rather than lots of other stuff, but ultimately it was still a system that was for voice calls. If you go back to the 1980s, there was no internet, there was no broadband, and there was no ISDN2. It was a voice call system. And that equipment has been dying on its feet for some years. It's 40 years old. And it's why back in 2018, BT Group, and I'm using that term BT Group because, as I was saying earlier, just to be really clear, BT Group as an entity own the equipment, this equipment in the telephone exchange. They kind of own the telephone exchange buildings, or at least they rent them. But then we as Openreach Limited, we look after the bit from these boxes on the left through to the various wires in the street, whether they're copper or fiber, and it goes through to the premises. As I mentioned, we stop at the master socket. And then again, as I mentioned, we sell to some 690 providers who then sell on to other people. Back in 2017-18, BT Group, who own this equipment, went to Ofcom and said, this equipment's dying on its feet, we can't get parts. And in fact, a lot of the engineers have spent their whole careers looking after this. They've come into retiring, some of them are retired. We need to be able to now have a 7-year plan to move away from this equipment into newer, better stuff. So that is what this is all about. It's actually saying, when people say PSTN, or the public subscriber telephony network, or they talk to you about analog to digital, this is what they mean at the moment. It means that that black box has got to be switched off, and it will be switched off at the end of 2025 is the current plan. What do you get out of the black box today? Well, you get a line that's copper all the way through, as you can see represented by that yellow line that goes into a street cabinet, out of a street cabinet, into somebody's premises, and it sits there on a socket. And I'm pretty sure most of us have got these things in our home, if not at workplaces. It's worthwhile mentioning that there is a blue box mentioned on here. That blue box represents equipment from other suppliers where they've got their own exchange equipment. It's usually TalkTalk or Sky. It isn't as easy as saying the rule of thumb is if I'm with TalkTalk and Sky, I must be on this blue box rather than the black one, because over the years people have swapped over, they've changed providers. It's true to say that some may be on one and some may be on the other. The reason we're calling it here is because those companies in particular, and Shell's another good example, who buy from TalkTalk, are keen that we make the point that although the 2025 date applies to this, what we call wholesale line rental or WLR box, it doesn't apply to their boxes. There are 5,500 exchanges out there. In every one of those, it will have this black box, this wholesale line rental, this PSTN box. I don't know how many of them actually have this blue box we're talking about, but a significant number, urban conurbation cities, will have access through Sky and TalkTalk to their own version of that. And again, it's an all copper line. What we do for them is we still look after the copper end to end. We don't touch anything to do with the exchange equipment. That is theirs. That goes on beyond 2025. The black box belongs to BT. That is closing at the end of 2025. Let's just talk then about what the swap out. If you've got to be swapped out and you are going to get a letter, perhaps, let's find out. Let's have a think about what that means. It means that the replacement product is not a like-for-like product. It is not like for like. Why do I say that? That brings us to our green box. And the green box effectively is the new kid on the block. It is the box in the telephone exchange, been around for some years now, which we know as a fiber head end or a fiber box, call it what you will. And out of that comes fiber, not surprising. What do you mean by fiber? It's a piece of glass, very, very, very thin glass, almost like a plasticky type thing. Great news for us generally, because it means that you haven't got the problems with metal. You don't have the issue with water getting in and starting to mess about. You've got much bigger bandwidths because you're now going at the speed of light instead of the speed of sound. So there's lots of things. The so-called Internet of Things comes to life. It does everything from the frivolous, downloading a video in half the time, quarter of the time, down to the biometric side of things, potentially the NHS using this to examine you at home rather than going to doctor's surgeries, if you can get an appointment anyway. There are two flavors of fiber. The one at the bottom on the screen is shown by the purple line is fiber to the premises. That means there is no cabinet in the middle. It runs all the way through in various stages, but it runs all the way through effectively to the premises. You'll notice there's a different socket on the end of it. And that's why if you do have this end-to-end service, there's about 10.5 million premises in the UK today that have access to that service. You will have an engineer come to your premises and swap out your master socket for this little box. Those that really like to take notes, that's called an ONT, or optical network terminal. It is effectively a light box because you've got to send and receive light end-to-end on a piece of glass. Fast, this is the gigabyte Britain stuff. However, as you probably worked out, 10 million is not going to be enough to be able to make sure that everyone can move over. There are, in fact, some 10 million lines still connected to this black box, and that's the size of the problem we have in the 2.5 years left to get those customers away from the black box onto the green one. But for most people today, there is already a solution there, and that is fiber to the cabinet. It's kind of what it says. For many years, when this network was being built, it was very difficult to get all the way to a customer's premises, digging up everybody's drive and so on. And so fiber to the cabinet, as you can see from this diagram, leaves the copper in place between the street cabinet and the customer's premises socket, and it just adds that piece of fibre in between our little green box there and the green box in the road. We believe that at the moment, 95% of the UK has access to fibre to the cabinet, sometimes known in the trade as SOGEA. Not going to complicate things with the difference of that unless someone asks me later on. But fibre to the premises, I told you before, only about 10 million, and we have aspirations to push that up to 25 million over the next few years. So that's what we're talking about. In a summary form, black box is going to be switched off, green box takes over, blue box isn't being touched. Big red writing on the top of this slide, it says there will not be an exchange switchover. Each CP will migrate their own customers when they're ready. Remember what I said what a CP was, a communications provider. That's the Sky, the Talk, the BT, those 690 different suppliers. They will decide when you, me, our customers, our clients, our lift shaft, our burglar alarm, our fire alarm, whatever it is, they will decide when that is switched over. Very typical example, down the street where you live, number 13579, if every one of those people are with a different supplier, one's with Sky, one with Talk, one's with Vodafone, etc., they will not move collectively on one day, maybe not even in the same year. Every supplier will do their own thing at their own time. They will contact you by whichever method they contact you today. Could be an email, could be a phone call, which is unlikely because obviously that costs money to get people to phone you, and it could well be a letter. And that letter could well be turning up in your client's door as we speak, and it will say something along the lines of great news, you're going to move you over to digital from Analogue, and this is what it means for you. So let's have a think what that means for you. Next slide, please, Ian. There we are. So you jumped two there. Go back one. Please, thank you. Little box, so you know, notice a big red cross has appeared. So effectively, what this means is at the end of 2025, we've got to disconnect everybody from that black box. What that means, though, is that it's not going to happen at the last day of December 2025. It's got to happen between now and 2025. So every one of those different suppliers I talked about will contact you and me at home, in our offices, our customers, our clients, somehow between now and the end of 2025, and they will say, great news, you're going digital. The thing to remember is that when you are disconnected from that black box, which is what they've got to do at some time there, everything now effectively is going to go through one of these purple lines. It's going to either go through fibre to the cabinet or fibre to the premises, with the exception of that stuff I talked about in that blue box. And that means you need a router. Now, if you've got a customer, a client, for a local authority, adult social care and so on, that's obviously why you're here today, because that's what Appello have been really kind of motoring on. It means that now your world has moved to a router. So Mrs. Jones, 92 years old, doesn't want a router, not interested in a router, doesn't care about a router. Now her supplier has to give her a router, because for her to continue any kind of service going forward, that must be through a router, because you've got to use that to get through to the fibre network. Next slide, please. What does that mean for inside the premises? So inside the premises, this is quite a busy premises we've got here. We're showing a master socket and a phone and a fax and all sorts of other things going on. It means that on the day of migration, given to you by your supplier, it will say that every socket in your premises, whether that's an extension socket, the main socket, if you're thinking about your estate wider than just your dispersed alarm or your care alarm customers, but your own personal estate, your offices, your own home even for that matter, all your sockets will stop working on that day. And what will happen is that only one socket will work. It will be the master socket. It will not give you anything but broadband, and that's why you need to have a router. Therefore, you can see there, you're now router centric. Your extensions no longer work. Any devices that are working today through a socket, therefore now have to work through the router. And the question for you is, what do I need to continue to work in that premises? How does it connect to a router? Routers are designed to be used with an Ethernet cable or Wi-Fi. Some of them are coming with an analog port, which is known in the trade as an analog terminal adapter or ATA port, but we'll come on to that in just a second. You'll also notice that at the bottom here, we show a little ONT for fibre to the premises, and we've got a couple of little black boxes there. They are representing battery backup, because one of the things that black box we had before we talked about gave us was some form of resilience. wasn't really designed for that. It was designed effectively to give you an analog signal, but actually the byproduct was that 50 volts is pumped down the line, you had a power cut, it carried on working if there was a power cut because the energy was now coming effectively down the copper from the telephone exchange. That ends on the day of your migration. And if you want to keep your service alive, the responsibility now moves to you as an end customer, and you've got into the world of battery backup units to keep your router alive, and or possibly this ONT if you've got one of those. Openreach don't actually sell these things. We don't do routers, we don't have battery backup, and therefore I call out to you is do check with your provider. Do they sell battery backup units? Are you likely to get one? If so, what's it going to cost? If it's for your clients, they may get one for nothing from their supplier. They may not. They may just get a mobile phone. They may just be asked if they've got one. So resilience becomes an issue. Next slide, please, Ian. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is you can have these slides afterwards. These are just use cases. Most of you are going to be talking about telecare today. But again, when you go away, do think about the wider implications. If you run an office, an estate, burglar alarms, fire alarms, chip and pin machines, anything that's on a standard telephone line today that doesn't have a router will potentially need one in future. Same question, how am I going to connect to a router? Next slide, please, Ian. Quick word about ATA ports. Again, I'm not going to drag my way through this, just a few words to the wise, really. In the industry generally, and probably telecare in particular, there has been a body of thought for some years that says it's all a bit of a storm in the teacup, this. What will happen is that you'll get a new router from your supplier, you plug it in the back because it's all just, and it just carries on working, happy days. That we feel is kind of a dangerous place to think. As far as these ATA ports are concerned, these analog ports, and there's a picture there of a few of those that you see there that we've taken for our own test lab. There are three considerations. The first is not every supplier is likely to provide one of these things. Some will and some won't. The second thing to remember is that even if you have got one of these ports, it's got to be switched on. You cannot assume it will just turn up switched on. It has to be part of the core package with your supplier that they switch it on for voice over IP, so VoIP, at their platform end. And finally, is it going to actually work? Can you take something that was designed for analog, shoehorn it through a voice over IP port? The thing I'm going to just draw your attention to is that last sentence there. The ATA port is designed for voice calls from phones, not for sending DTMF tones. So DTMF tones are beep, 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 beep. And you will know if you've used analog in the past, particularly for telecare, usually you get somebody presses the button, it makes a call, it dials the phone number for the call center for the ARC. It does a handshake. The two things send digits to each other. We've seen through testing that these are unreliable. It means that effectively you can get elongation of tones, you can get shortening of tones, a bit like someone playing a piano really badly. You as a human can kind of work out what they're trying to get to, but in fact, machines don't like that. Machines need to know that a 1 is a 1, a 2 is a 2. Openreach's position is this is an IP network for IP products. If you do try and use an ATA port in the back of a router, then please beware. It's absolutely something that we don't recommend for life critical equipment. We're really pleased if we see suppliers moving to GSM, which doesn't help us at all because we don't sell SIM cards, but to look after their clients and also IP because it gives them some resilience, which they aren't going to get. It's also true to say there's lots of moving parts. Every one of these different suppliers we talked about, Sky, TalkTalk, BT, etc., have their own routers or hubs. They work slightly differently depending how they're set up. They go to different platforms. If you're relying on these ports at the back, we actually feel it's a mistake and you need to think twice about it because you start to take a risk. Next slide, please. You're still there with me, Ian? There we go. Next slide, please. Next one. Okay, thank you. And again, I'm not going to go through all this because I don't want to take everybody's time up. 3 call outs for me really. Number 1, audit your customers, find out what you've got, where you've got it, what's plugged in, who's got it plugged in if you possibly can. Ask yourself the question, if that person gets a router, if I get a router, what do I do with it? What is out there? Number 2, speak to your hardware supplier. Well, Appello in many cases is going to be that for you today. Speak to them, and the fact they're doing this is really proactive, really good to see, because it means that you can have a conversation about what they recommend to have a smooth transition of service over to IP. And the last thing is if depending on who you are, particularly if you are a local authority, do speak to whoever you pay your bill to, your Sky Talk or BT, whoever it is, your account manager. Ask them what their plans are for you, for your lift lines, for your alarm lines, etc., etc. I probably overstayed my welcome more time, but I'm going to finish there, if I may, hand back to the chair, and I'll speak to you later on the panel. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, John. I'd be astonished if a lot of people didn't get something new and important out of that, even though some of the messages have been heard before. The degree to which you brought them to life and added the emphasis of how hard this is to predict about when and where it will become effective, and therefore the urgency about taking action now is really welcome. Carl is going to now take a few moments to give everybody some insights into the practicalities that we see as the UK's largest telecare monitoring provider. We, if you're not already aware, across the Appello group, across our various businesses and brands, we support about 350,000 elderly and vulnerable people on behalf of hundreds of monitoring providers, on behalf of hundreds of local authorities and housing providers, as well as a number of private pay customers of our own. And the scale of that means that we have a really good line of sight to some of the trends that are already playing out. So Carl, over to you, please, to bring this to life for the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So what I'd just like to do initially is just share with you the problem, really, the problem as we see it. And on this first slide, I've broken down what John's really well described are the two issues that we see as a monitoring service based around the transition, the digital transition. So we term it in our business as first-time failure rate. So I'll refer to it as that through the rest of this. But they're basically broken down into two problems. And the first one, as John described, is about how the green box shown on John's diagram impacts round-trip delay. So that's the length of time it takes to send DTMF messages over digital networks. So that creates problems with things like checksums, so that when the protocol fails, it doesn't then confirm that the data that's been sent in the protocol is accurate, and then it shuts itself down and the device redials. Not saying that they catastrophically fail each time, because they don't, but they do reattempt and go around the network and around the process again. So that's the first one, and that's about round-trip delay. The second one is about DTMF malformation, and this is about sending DTMF packets across an analog stroke digital network, a hybrid network, where those DTMF messages get corrupt by network components. So digital networks are not good at transposing DTMF or STMF signals, and therefore we see quite a lot of this malformation process. Okay, so how does this manifest itself? The issues, if we can go to the next slide, please, Ian. What I'm showing here is a landing page on our platform from our ARC, and this is quite an extreme example where a call has hit our platform and the protocol has failed because of one of the two issues that I've described previously, and also it hasn't presented CLI. Now that may be for a number of reasons. It might be that the number has been excluded, it might be because it's been corrupt, so there may be a number of different reasons. But this operator, presented with what you see in front of you, is now left with a call that's landed with audio, but have no means of triaging the call. So it's now, apart from through conversation with the service user, so we've got no useful information apart from talking to the service user. So that's quite an extreme view of what can happen when we get protocol failure or protocol malformation. So I just wanted to share that one with you. If we look further, as Tim mentioned, we have a significant amount of calls every month, over 250,000 calls received, to around 200,000 operator presented. So what this shows is those calls that have been presented to us through May broken down into device type. So what we're trying to do here is look for where are the trends in terms of what devices are failing at a higher rate than others. And the interesting thing that's come out of this is that dispersed alarms are obviously more reliable at this current stage than the group's equipment. When we look at that and we look at some of the protocol traces, we can see that the protocol length is longer with Scheme because there's two elements to it. And therefore, the round-trip delay is compounded, and therefore we see higher failure rates with groups equipment than we do with dispersed alarm equipment. But just to summarise on this slide, though, the dispersed alarm components within this slide are around about 4.5%. So as an average, they're around about 4.5%, and I'll come back to that point in a few slides' time. If you cut the same data across protocols and we start looking at, okay, do we need to focus on which protocols are failing at the highest rate and start looking at replacing that equipment, we can see this split. Now, unfortunately, because when we get a round-trip delay, the device sends its alarm string and we can't acknowledge what the protocol it is, we end up with this bucket of calls that have no protocol associated to them because we can't associate what the header tone was. So we will look further into if we can spread that 26% over the known protocol failures, whether we've got a clear protocol that fails at a higher rate than others. The interesting one there is that there's not a lot of difference in the structure of protocols between TT-New and TT-92, apart from TT-92 has a richer format. So therefore the checksum has got a higher rate of failure because the data rate is slightly higher. The next slide is an interesting comparison because this slide was presented by the TSA back in June last year, and that's running at 3.3%, but quite closely aligned to the data that you saw on the first failure rate slide that I showed, and we're running at about 4.3. So there's been additional work done on the network, so that number will have gone up, but it does align itself to the failure rates that we're also seeing. The last thing I'd just like to cover is that John spoke there about the ATA and about reliability. Number of providers, including Appello, is offering a service which is a conversion from analog to digital. We are doing something slightly different to an ATA, whereas we are conditioning the protocol to be digitized before it goes across the network. We're not sending DTMF tones across a voice network, which is what a router will do with an ATA port. The A to D conversion will actually condition the DTMF tones into a SIP message and send it across the internet, which is much more reliable. So that is the approach we're taking. However, just thought it'd be useful just to go across these advantages of these type of solutions and just show you that there are limitations to doing this. You know, it's still a fairly unproven piece of technology. It doesn't provide the solutions that pure digital systems provide with multiple calls and the rest of it. And it can cause issue because what you're doing is leaving analog warden call equipment in the outfield that can fail, and therefore you can't get the parts. So it does leave you exposed to equipment that's failing. The advantages of doing it is it does improve the connection rate to the monitoring center without question. Our testing has seen significant improvement in first-time failure rate. It's a lower cost interim solution to go in digital. And it provides the opportunity for you to just take a little bit longer to think about how you're going to deploy a digital strategy across your whole estate. So just things that you should consider if you go down this route is the converter built specifically for scheme equipment or for dispersed equipment? Can it handle things like inbound calls? So what we've seen with a lot of devices is that They can support an outbound protocol, but when you try and do a call back into the site, they struggle with inbound DTMF tones. So that's something to look out for. And the other thing is, what connection type? What do you connect to? Are you connecting to an ADSL circuit? Are you connecting to a SIP trunk? And that needs to be carefully considered before you start thinking about A to D conversion for your outfield equipment. Okay, thank you very much.
I think one of the really important things to stress about that is the phrase interim. There is no substitute, as John has described earlier, and as we've talked about, for being in a fully digital environment. The quality of call experience, the safety, the well-being benefits are all so much stronger in a fully digital environment. But recognizing that that time is sometimes going to be, and cost sometimes going to be, a limiting factor to the pace at transition, then, as Carl describes, those sticking plaster solutions of A to D converters are ones that need to be very thoroughly tested and assured just that they will at least bridge that gap and won't fall foul, as John described, of being just another way to get DTMF tones corrupted and therefore put people's lives at risk. If you are one of the installers and maintainers who's joined us today, hopefully you've heard even more compelling reasons why conversations with your customers need to go up a gear about how you can help them with their analog to digital transition. If you're a housing provider or a local authority, again, hopefully you've found some real clarity in the need to have an urgent reassessment, if you don't already have a program very firmly underway, an urgent reassessment of what you're doing when and how. We're going to finish today's event with a panel discussion, and you can see on there that some of the speakers, myself, Carl, and John, are going to be part of it. We're also joined by 3 subject matter experts from the installation and maintenance field: Adrian Lee from OpenView, Steve Russell from T2, and Stephen Hunter from NEFS, all of who have perspectives on how they are helping their customers with the analog to digital transition. And this is your opportunity to get thoughts from people playing in this space, as well as OpenReach or ourselves, about anything that's on your mind relating to the analog to digital migration. So Ian, if you would act as MC for us, and if panelists, if you haven't already, if you'd come off mute, and there we go, great stuff. Our full-on rogues gallery of us are all here for anything you would want to know. So Ian, I've seen you're on mute, Ian. I've seen there've been a few questions starting to pop in already. Help us through it.
Yeah, certainly. So if you've got any questions, please use the Q&A feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. A few have already started to come in though, so I'll kick it off with, what are the biggest signs of a first-time call failure that I should be looking out for? Carl or Tim, have you got a perspective on that to start?
That's definitely Carl's gig.
It depends what platform you are using. So we start looking at the call at the point that the CTI service, so that's the receiving part of our platform, starts to negotiate with the product. So we can see, we run analysis against the protocol as it tries to negotiate and provide its payload. Not all others are like that. So you may get a failed receipt of ID, or you may get some other indication. So I can only speak, you know, in detail about our own platform, really.
But if you're in the field, if you're an engineer and you've been called out to site because a housing provider or local authority is reporting the system not working, how do they determine whether or not that's actually just part of the analog to digital transition, meaning the system's not performing as well as it might be, versus actually a hard down from or an impairment of the service?
Yeah, I mean, a key indicator is that a device will signaling and you'll hear the exchange, but then it'll just be kissed off and start to redial and represent. And it may do that a couple of times and then get connection. And that is a key symptom of first-time failure. So from an outfield point of view, that may be obvious. From running data from a platform, then we just need to see how that's negotiated with that specific platform.
Ian?
Great, thank you. So the next question is, how long will the process take to upgrade to digital? Adrian, can I ask you that question, please?
Yeah, I mean, it would all depend, I suppose, on what path you wanted to go. And, you know, if we look at something like the Smart Connect, putting on existing cable and things like that, a much quicker solution. If we looked at an SLS system or other digital, which involved a rewire, then obviously by the time you've gone through your tenants, your consultancy, and decided your path you're going to go, then it can take a bit longer. Scheme size as well, depends, you know, even down to, is it single floor, 3 stories, things like that. It's an open-ended question. It's one we're getting a lot. It depends on, I suppose, how many tenants you've got. Also the problems, of course, with Section 20 and talking to the tenants, are they going to agree to it? Who's going to fund it? So, you know, we've had schemes from sort of, you know, 1 month to 6, 7 months. As you know, we've got schemes ongoing at the moment where we're still getting problems with, if you want kickback from leaseholders and people like that. The actual installation itself, you know, if you're not going to rewire, very quick. You know, get your broadband line in, get your equipment rack in, and start to swap the units. Yes, you will have a downtime. There's always a method, whether you're dealing with Appello, Tunstall, Tyne-Tech, whoever, you're going to be on a non-speech solution for a number of days. But, you know, if it's a full rewire, open-ended, and it depends on participation and planning. But it can be done. It can be done in a matter of, you know, 2 weeks from seeing a system come out to a new one to, you know, 4 or 5 weeks, depending.
Thanks,
It also
Adrian.
depends from the
Ian,
housing
just
associations
to
as
come in
well.
there, just to come in there, we're doing a large upgrade program for one of our customers using Smart Connect, and typically once all the broadband's in place, we're seeing probably the standard installation taking between 2.5 and 3 weeks per scheme. Average size scheme being
say a couple of weeks. You're not rewiring, I take it there, Steve. You're going on existing cables. It's getting the access, isn't it? And again, scheme manager, housing associations can really assist with that.
I think, you know, to pick up with the Appello guys, what we've learned, obviously, is that Smart Connect's only been in the market for a number of months now. We've been working with Appello on this partnership project. And so what we've been able to do with Appello's help is look at some of our installation methods and tweak those. And with that, it's about, and I think any installers that are on the line now, to get the most effective installation in terms of time. I think it's about the amount of planning that you put in up front, A, with your clients, B, with the supplier, in terms of perhaps access, as you say, Adrian, around having the broadband line ready and enabled, having your program done off site, which we do here. And as I say, we've probably seen ourselves from an installation perspective, not probably a week off of the standard installation time, by just being more efficient about the way we go about things and working with, in this case, with Appello.
Yeah, I fully agree. And something you touched on there is the planning of the equipment, whether you're going to pre-stage that off-site or, you know, making sure you have got provisions on site to store it. And one of the things we see all the time, and it's the participation of the scheme managers in, you know, we may even have a coffee morning with the tenants, explain what's going on, just so that you don't get the questions and answers on every property you're entering. You know, you want to be, from a cost efficiency point of view, you want to be on that scheme, working in and out to agreed appointments, you know, and you want to work in a systematic manner. You don't want to be picking everything up and going up to the first floor, doing one flat there, and somebody come and say, "Oh, number 10's come back, you can go to hers now." You want to get your guys down these corridors and in and out of the properties, you know, as in a well-organized sort of manner. And I'm sure that's how you've done yours, Steve.
Thank you, Adrian. Thanks, Steve. just jump to some other questions because they're starting to flood in now. Thank you. Does anyone know if providers will be charging to update to a digital router? John, maybe is that a question for yourself?
It is, but I think it's an unknown answer. Generally, the view is that CPs, communication providers, should be giving their customer the best possible service. It's more likely they won't. I don't think there's a chance. I mean, like all these things, I can't speak on behalf of what they were going to do, but it seemed unlikely they would charge you for a physical piece of hardware. They've got to keep you going, and if a router is the only way they can keep you going, they must give you that, and that'll be at their expense. They may, of course, wrap it into your package. So whether your calls package, your lines package changes and it gets wrapped up in that and you don't see it, it's hard to know. But I'm not aware of anybody saying, oh, to keep with us, you've got to buy this thing. More often than not, they want to keep your custom. It makes sense for them to give you the smoothest transition possible. And therefore, it's more likely they'll do all they can to make sure you're happy. For 95% of the UK, probably most people who haven't got things like telecare alarms, lift alarms, all the other stuff that I spend all my life talking about, this is good news. It's fantastic, it's faster, it's better, it's quicker, it's all that kind of stuff. For companies like Appello, it's really good as well, because these guys are, particularly in my experience, and I'm not going to kick back here, folks. I speak to a lot of telecare companies. I love them all dearly, but there's no doubt that we've been saying for many years, over 5 years, IP is the way ahead. The more that you get into IP, the more you start to get the benefits of IP. You start to get all these extra metrics and biometrics, and all sorts of stuff comes out of it we just didn't have before. So embrace it, love it, rather than try to shoehorn other stuff into it. But certainly, as I said to you, it's this 5%, the real nitty gritty stuff, the things where it could be life-saving equipment. That's where the concern is. And do remember that your communications provider, in many cases, doesn't know that you or your client exists. They know they've got someone paying a bill. Going back to Mrs. Jones, 92, dementia, she pays a bill, the council pays the bill, someone pays the bill. They don't know necessarily what she's got at the end of it. I don't know about you, but when I get old, which is about 5 minutes away, and someone says to me, you need a telecare device, wouldn't be the first thing I thought about is phoning out the council, my telephone company, to tell them about it. What's it got to do with them? Now they need to know, and that's the rub. So I wouldn't expect, as I said to you, I'd be most surprised if you do see bad practice, if you hear bad practice, if you hear people scams or things that you just think, well, that's not right. Why on earth are they expecting that vulnerable person to pay that? Do send them my way, and I will make sure that I investigate, or someone investigate, or Ofcom are aware.
That's really good. Just one thing I would add to that is that when we talk about routers, this is in the property. So this is somebody's individual home. Yep. For a lot of the people on this audience, they'll have two types of customers that they're thinking about: those in a dispersed alarm setting and those in a scheme equipment setting. Mm-hmm. In a scheme equipment setting, there are two things that you need to consider. One is the individual phone line in the home, but also there is the ECS, which is independent of the phone socket. It's connected to the main line in. So I'm just contextualizing for our audience that even if the phone socket goes dead, if they haven't acted on the ECS, then that will have a very separate bearing.
It's pretty worth mentioning, though, and a good example of that is I was down at Mildenhall, one of our test sites, and Flagship, they look after, or Morehouse Security do that, and they've got, for example, bungalows there, but 27 care home, so it's effectively a care home setting, but everything goes back to that UAC. It all goes back to a socket, just a simpler socket. When I was with the guy, the socket was in the loft. They couldn't even find where the socket was years ago and put up in the loft somewhere. So for them, it is a router. It is finding that socket up in the loft, and it is connecting it effectively back to the UAC, or whatever you want to call it these days. I know it's probably a tunnel view, but you know what I mean? So it can be as basic as that, although you're absolutely right, Tim. Wouldn't disagree with anything you said. But sometimes it is as knife and forking as it was, as doing that, even though it's a care home.
Thanks, John. Thank you. So moving on to the next question. Is there enough skilled engineers in digital if demand for digital equipment increased significantly? Stephen Hunter, do you have a view on this?
Yes, absolutely. There is a shortage of engineers in the fire and security and tech sector, to be honest. But with the training that we're getting at the minute, IT training, the apprentices coming through, they're significantly better off IT, the IoT, the IP ranges, etc. So it's an easier skill set to teach basically. And we have our own training room, which we do IP. We've also got the luxury IP cameras that have been out for a long time, which it's all the same, ones and zeros. But basically, there is an engineer. The good side of digital is 90% of the calls can be handled from a tech support in an office, because we can dial in through, for Appello, for instance. We can dial in from the cloud and diagnose issues without the need to wait for an engineer to attend. So that's really seen a significant decrease in the amount of resource we need when we're working on digital systems other than analog. So it's a double-edged sword, but there is a need for more engineers. However, as everyone moves to digital, I think the first rate fixes, etc., they'll significantly increase because of the ability to dial into systems and get them fixes diagnosed or even repaired remotely.
Just to come in there, Ian, from what we're seeing, I think, and going back to Tim, I think one of your opening slides, and when you look at the amount of upgrades, physical upgrades that have taken place thus far, from our perspective, there's a significant shortage of skill base, not in our company, but in all of the companies that are able to provide these installation upgrades across the country at the moment. The resource and capacity that's available is fall short significantly. Exacerbating that situation, I think, as well, is that a lot of our customers and other organisations are having to consider their smoke detection arrangements as well, and compliance with British standards, BS 5839 of parts 1 and 6. And so we're finding that when we're going to do analog to digital upgrades on tech systems, we're having to do the smoke detection at the same time. And that can only serve to put extra strain on the capacity that's available. As we all know on this call, tech is quite niche compared with the fire detection and security world. And so, you know, there's a lot to do in a relatively very short space of time, as we've heard today. And the people at the front of the queue are the people that are going to get their upgrades done on time. The people towards the middle and back are going to have to find some different temporary solutions.
Yeah, that's absolutely
right. Moving on to the next question. How do we handle cellular black spots for dispersed alarms? Carl or Tim, do you have a view on this?
So with Smart Life, we've got multiple connection methods. The device is capable of being plugged into LAN, mobile, Wi-Fi, PSTN. So there are multiple ways of connecting that device. So if you have a poor signal area, you can choose a different connection method. We've also improved significantly the use of antennas, external antennas, which helps in black spot areas. It's always a consideration when deploying devices on GSM. So yeah, we're constantly looking at ways of improving that. There was another question. You know, we do roam as well for the best network. I did see a question that came in. And to answer that specific question, we choose, or we assign to the network with the strongest signal at the point that the device connects to the network. So so that's how it chooses its preferred method through a GSM route. But yeah, it is an area to consider, and we're constantly looking at the products that we provide to make sure that we have alternative connection methods.
Right, thank you. And whilst I've got you, do you have the data for VI Plus and not just the Tunstall VI?
I do. I don't have it here, but I do have it. I combined the two just to shorten the slides out. But yeah, I'm very happy to provide that
if anyone gets in contact with us with that question, we can definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. There's a question here from Nigel Grant, which says, my installer here. So my understanding is that it is not recommended to use phone port on router for VI units. Does any of the panel have a view on this?
100%. It's exactly what we said on the BT slide, isn't it? It's not designed for DTMF. And Carl, I'm sure you confirm, but a lot of the failure rates where the DTMF signals are not getting through now because of not necessarily the endpoint kit or the receiving kit, but the bit in the middle.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Exactly. It is exactly what John from OpenReach said earlier on. Completely agree.
Brilliant, thank you. Question from Ron, which is, there are a significant number of social alarm clients that prefer not to be monitored by ARC, but use local responders using personal recipients. These users only need VoIP technology without DTMF signaling. What provision is being made for these clients using ATA with the newer digital social alarms? John, did you have a view on that? Tim, you looked like you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to say the new social alarms, I think, are a variety of them don't comply with the British standards, and therefore it is an area that's still a little bit immature in terms of being confident that this is actually a genuine emergency class service. So if whoever asked that question just drops me a note separately, tim.barclay@appello.co.uk, I'll give you a bit more context to that.
Question from Nigel is, what roaming networks do Appello use?
So our current out-of-the-box provider who provides an APN service is CSL, and they have agreements with Tele2, EE02, and Vodafone. So those networks are used, but we do have some customers that are using other providers, other SIM providers as well. So they'll have their own arrangements, but certainly we go across all the major providers.
Great stuff. Last few questions. If anyone does have any more, please pop them in the Q&A. How often are you turning up to site with fault reports and your team are finding it difficult to identify the issues between the equipment and the network? Steve Russell, do you have a view on this?
I think all three of our installer maintainers should have a view. I would have put money on somebody asking this, because it must be such a bugbear in the sector.
Yeah, well,
my sort of top level response would be, it depends on the manufacturer's equipment. Different manufacturers, the main manufacturers, and we all know who they are, their systems operate in slightly different ways. Therefore, it can be easier in some cases to determine the difference between a network problem or system problem. And again, this is not a plug for Smart Connect, it's the one that we're working most with at the moment. On those systems, it's extremely easy. One, we've got the remote diagnostics, but two, when you turn up on site, it's crystal clear as to whether it's equipment, hardware, or whether it's related to the router and the network. So it's not, that is not providing an issue. The issue with Analogue is more about keeping the analog systems going for the longer time it takes to upgrade to the new systems. With some of the other manufacturers, it can be more difficult.
yeah, so we don't see any problem. Again, it has to be with Appello at the moment, because that's the one we're mostly installing. But it's very easy to diagnose whether it is network or equipment. One of our main call-outs is the system is beeping because they've had a power fail, which the equipment is on UPS. Unfortunately, it's on an FTTP line, and let's say BT's router isn't on UPS, so that goes down and brings your fibre down. And if the client hasn't taken the GSM backup SIM, obviously you can't dial anywhere. But we've solved that problem with plugging it into the UPS. So it's very easy to diagnose, especially as Steve's just mentioned, with the cloud-based remote servicing. You can see whether it's a network or if it's a singular bit of equipment.
And compared to traditional analog systems, how often are your guys turning up with a traditional analog system and finding uncertainty about, is this first time call failure? Is this the system just showing its age? Is this something else?
No, well, it's chalk and cheese. Analog systems, obviously, they're historically going to have a lot more problems as they're getting older, especially the PTS lines. So as BT were talking about there, the crossover, without a doubt, most of the exchanges, some of the exchanges are going to be digital. So it's going to be converting to digital somewhere and first-time call failures. But with the digital, first-time fixes are much easier. Even if we don't have to attend site, we're fixing equipment remotely by hard reset.
Stephen, I'm going to have to call you out. It is OpenReach, not BT. You've
Yes, I know.
got to get out of the habit of that.
BT group.
OpenReach. And Adrian?
Yeah, it's the same as thing. I mean, with the analog stuff, are we finding it difficult? No. A lot of OpenView engineers are experienced for many, many years on the all analog stuff. Falls to the other question of skill set. Yes, there's a skill set problem. We've got engineers been here 20 odd years. Tim, we've got engineers that came from yourself.
Yeah.
That, you know, a lot of years service. They have set procedures for isolating the system and determine if it's an on-site issue or if it's, you know, related to the provider and the network. We also have worked very close with Carl and your team, providing alternative numbers, which mean we can try the call to a different desk. We're quite lucky as well in that we have an in-house desk. So we can divert the call to our own desk and improve things as well. But reiterate what the guys have said, 9 times out of 10, first time faults, things like that are down to the lines. And we can move to another number that you guys can kindly provide. But again, it's a sticking plaster. You know, you're only moving it until that number gets updated. And it's not even a fixed thing. You know, I'm sure as OpenReach will tell you, the routing between, you know, our site in wherever Manchester and your Chippenham or, you know, New Milton sort of base doesn't take the same route every time. So you know, we might get straight through and an analog connection works fine, but tomorrow it might stick us down through Birmingham or somewhere else where that's digital and we won't get it.
Just coming on that way, Adrian said, could we go offshore, of course. Don't forget, depends on how it hits the network. Some even kick it offshore, come back again.
Yeah.
And it's again another reason why we don't recommend the use of things like ATAs, because effectively the network is complicated as it is. It's owned by lots of different people. Some at certain times of day, they kick it abroad and come back again because it's how they get their local rates and things like that. There's lots and lots of moving parts here. The best thing to do is keep it simple.
Agree.
Ian?
Few last questions. So we've got Carl, a question for you. Which call route would you recommend first on the dispersed alarm? Would you go SIM, broadband, or vice versa? What would be the recommendation?
It's location dependent. I think if you've got a strong signal, there's nothing wrong with going mobile first. If you're in an area that's maybe compromised, then I'd definitely go connected, either broadband or Wi-Fi, and then fall over to SIM. I think the question also asked, did it seamlessly fall back to SIM? Yes, it does. So if that primary route fails, it would fall back to SIM.
And if you can afford it both, I spent 10 years in the alarm industry and it was all about dual path. Easy said than done. It's expensive. I get all that kind of stuff, but again, it's a thing about how much risk you want to take and how much money you've got in the kitty, and those two things often don't marry up.
Well, and that's exactly why we created Smart Life, as having Wi-Fi, as having SIM, and having broadband interconnectivity, so that there was optionality for those people who wanted and needed it. Clearly, Wi-Fi would be the third choice out of those from a reliability point of view, but it acts as an option. And then
the follow-on question was, still on call routing, using a analog SIM call would be the last resort after exhausting broadband and digital SIM. Will this still have a chance of working as a last resort after December 2025?
Analog SIM, by that, do you think that means 2G?
No, I think it means analog protocol over G.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
So which which isn't a great start even now. So you know, we're finding higher first-time failure rates through that scenario than anything else. So it's you need to think about whether that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And any views on power of resilience, whether it is in the cellular network or in a Wi-Fi connected dispersed alarm?
Guys, what are your customers asking for in terms of backup batteries, in terms of power resilience?
Cellular. So if we're talking about dispersed alarm, they'll have battery backup. So the best way to go down in that case would be your SIM card, simply because if you've got a power failure, no doubt your router is going to turn off in your household. So you have to, for power resilience, you have to have a SIM card in there.
Great.
Right, and on to the last question, and I'll pose it to you, Tim, to start with. What should we prioritise when producing a procurement method to upgrade to digital? I'm sure everyone probably have a view on it though.
Well, the starting point should be what do you want to get out of it? I mean, I know this sounds a bit simplistic, but do you just want to replace like with like? I want to take a box off the wall and I want to replace it with another box, and I want it to work in this new digital world. Because if that's your aim, then it's about making sure your procurement focuses on compliance with standards, experience, capability, and the right value for money. So that's not always cheapest, as we know. That's a quality basket. But hopefully the objective would be more than just doing like for like. So it would be about using this as an opportunity to improve the quality of life of the resident, as well as improving their safety. So what else can we bring that would help them be more independent, feel safer? What else can we do that would help our housing or local authority teams be more productive and more effective? And speaking to a number of organizations, and we and others can provide case studies of this, who've used the analog to digital transition to actually really materially change the operating model with their customers, make themselves more efficient, and make their customers happier and safer. So, you know, how do you start your procurement? You start with, what is it I want to get out of this? Is it just like for like, or is it an opportunity to transform? And if it is, how do I make sure that those things are specified? I do that by speaking to people who've already gone down this journey and experienced the benefits of video connectivity, video door entry, high class audio, multiple door paths. You know, those sorts of things are all would then become part of your tick list. So, you know, hopefully that's an initial view to the question.
Exactly that, Ian. From ours, I've just written down here before you went into the detail, Tim. Just be clear on your objectives. So you've nailed it every single one.
Anybody else from the panelists want to have a final view on that?
Tim covered it.
Just check. Just keep on checking stuff. Just keep on checking stuff. Don't ever think you're on top of it. Always keep on checking what's available, what's there. What have you got to do? Size of the problem. Don't kick the can down the road. The quicker you are actually making sure you've got a plan, even if CPs aren't doing stuff yet, the more you will not get caught out.
And I think that's a really interesting point. One of the things that often comes up on a question as a question is, technology's forever evolving. Why start now rather than wait? And you've touched on a key point there, John, which is the longer you kick the can down the road, the greater uncertainty you add. Steve Russell touched on, and Stephen Hunter as well, to some extent, the skills gap that will exist. You know, it's not that any of the organizations here don't have brilliant people. It's just physically there is not going to be enough capacity to get everything done all in the last year if people leave it until then. And the other point is that in the same way that technology does evolve, the step change between moving from analog to digital now is such a big improvement that the move between digital now and digital in a year or digital in two, that won't be a big leap. The big leap is between analog and digital. If you go from a non-smartphone to a smartphone, it doesn't matter whether you go to iPhone 11 or iPhone 12 or iPhone 13, it's a bloody big step. The little nuance of the iteration isn't the important thing. Start now. Of course we would say that, right? We're in this game, but start now. Persuade your customers to start now. They will only benefit from it as a result. Ian, any further questions?
No, thanks, Tim. That was the final questions. I think we've kept everyone for 22 minutes longer than planned, and everyone stayed with us. So thank you very much. We'll bring it to a close. Just want to say a big thank you to all our panelists and presenters, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, Adrian, Steve, Stephen, John, really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Everybody who joined, really valuable. If you've got questions, just follow up with us. Thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you.
Now back.